Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So, we have been taught that materials matter, resources matter, the accumulation of wealth is the key to development. And all of this is just tremendously wrong. Actually, it's ideas which matter. This world is a battle place of ideas. And basically, this chapter is about how the wrong ideas came to be dominant, and then they destroyed the world, and they are continuing to destroy the world. And so, today, the major obstacles that are in the path of progress of Pakistan are not resource constraints, but ideas which are wrong. Like just yesterday, the Minister of Finance was talking about how we are running out of fiscal space. But actually, the fiscal space is not the one that he thinks. That is, the government is not budget constrained. There is a fiscal constraint, but it is not. It is in a different dimension. So, not having the understanding of what things need to be done, what are our priorities, whether we should be doing inflation targeting or whether we should have some other policy goals. These are the wrong ideas are dominant and prevalent, and having the right idea is the biggest weapon. So this chapter is about the road not taken, which means basically what policy options there existed which were not adopted because of the wrong theories. So first thing is that Keynes developed the general theory, but his ideas were never understood by economists. So the Keynesian revolution actually never took place. There could have been a revolution, but basically, similarly, just like Keynesian theory was never actually understood, although everybody believes that they understand Keynes because we are taught something which is called Keynesian. Similarly, in policy, Keynesian policy was never implemented. It was some sort of a bad approximation to the real policies of Keynes. So, some half-baked compromises were made between the Keynesian theory and the policy and the earlier free market orthodoxy. So, this lecture is mostly about the history of macroeconomic thought. In the first chapter we said, why did no one see it coming? So the answer is because they didn't have the right mindsets which would enable them. They didn't have the right conceptual frameworks. So now this chapter basically reviews what happened in macroeconomics, starting from what Keynes said. So actually Keynes said that I am not a Keynesian because basically there was something which was called the neoclassical synthesis, sometimes called Hicks and Hansen, and I think Samuelson also played a major role. And this is basically the ISLM model. The investment equals savings and liquidity equals money. So there are two loci of equilibria. And the point is of this neoclassical synthesis is that it gives the short run to Keynes and it keeps the long runs. That in the long run, the neoclassical, the theory, the pre-Keynesian theory, that the classical economics that Keynes had rejected operates, but in the short run, because prices are rigid, and this is so just one small concession that is made to Keynes, and that is that prices are rigid and that leads to unemployment, and so the government can do a little bit of policy, but basically free markets are perfect and they lead to perfect outcomes, but in the short run prices are rigid. Actually, this is a very severe misunderstanding of Keynes. Keynes says that utility maximization doesn't happen because the laborers do not set their wages equal to their disutility of labor. Profit maximization doesn't take place because the negotiation in the supply and demand for labor does not take place according to the real wage, it takes place according to the nominal wage. Automatically that eliminates the possibility of profit maximization. Supply and demand fails in the labor market, and so all of these are fairly radical ideas, but in the neoclassical synthesis all of this Keynesian ideas were rejected. The only idea that was said to be Keynesian, although Keynes explicitly and specifically rejects this in the general theory, is that Keynes thought that wages are rigid. When the wages are rigid, then it's very easy to see that supply and demand equilibrium will not work. And so if the wages are too high, there will be unemployment, and this unemployment can remain for a long time if the wages don't change. And so there is also the possibility, why do negotiations take place in nominal wage, which everybody could see, there was proof of that. So the negotiations take place in nominal wage because there is money illusion. People confuse the nominal wage with the real wage. They don't notice that the prices are rising, and so if you have money illusion, then all of the Keynesian phenomena can be established. So basically Keynes was reduced to the concept of a money illusion. So now, prior to Keynes, we had the quantity theory of money. According to the QTM, MV equals PT. Money times velocity is price times the number of transactions. And the velocity is supposed to be constant, and the transactions, which is the real economy, is supposed to remain the same. If the money doubles, then the prices will double and nothing else will change. Now, this is just a statement of a faith, because when money doubles, everything actually changes. And the velocity also changes, prices change, transactions, and that's what you would expect to happen. Basically, you have what you need, and what the economists don't provide is a mechanism. What happens when money supply increases? And it depends on how the money supply increases, whether it's the government that's injecting money, whether it's credit creation by banks, and whether it's export-led creation of credit. All of these things matter, and they make a big difference. So there's no magic that when you change the money, it automatically hits only the prices and not the velocity and not the number of transactions. In fact, everything is affected. So what Keynes talked about was liquidity preference, or the demand for money. And now he said that the demand for money depends on the interest rate. Immediately, this disturbs the classical economics, because basically this is also called the classical dichotomy. Money is on one side of the equation and the real economy is on the other side, and there's no interaction between the two. Money can only hit prices. So as soon as money can affect interest rate, then interest rate will affect your investments, and so this will have real effects. So Keynes says that no, money has real effects. And how does Keynes do it? Well, Keynes says basically that you have only two liquid assets, money and bonds. And bonds pay interest, and money does not pay interest. You can assimilate your savings deposits and into bonds if you like. It doesn't make any difference. So as now the money supply is exogenous and fixed by the banks, not the banks but the central bank. So suppose the central bank increases the money supply, what will happen? Well, people have more money than they want. The demand for money is now out of balance with the supply. So what people will do is, well, they will try to shift out of money into bonds. And what this will do is that it will increase the supply of bonds, increase the demand for bonds, which will cause the price of bonds to decline. The interest rate which is being paid, the effective yield will go down because, not the price of bonds, the price of bonds may go up, but the yields on bonds will fall. When the yield falls, then the demand for money is increased because now the alternative is not so attractive, and so basically when the interest rate falls sufficiently, then the demand for money will be brought back into equilibrium. And so now, because there is a fall in the interest rate, credit is more easily available, money is more cheaply available, so there will be an increase in investment. Also, this will add to the aggregate demand, and it will also add to future productive capacity. So basically money has an impact not just in the short run, but also in the long run, because the economy will grow at a faster rate. That is the LM curve. Also, Keynes thought that this mechanism may not work very well if you are at very low interest rates, because what will happen is that additional money supply will not cause interest rates to fall further because of the liquidity trap. And also, if you are operating at full capacity, then additional money may not be useful for additional investment because you are already at full capacity. So with those two exceptions, this will operate in general in the economy where there are some unemployed resources. So this is also one aspect of the name general theory. He said that the special theory applies only at full employment. So basically he says that the classical theory assumes full employment, and at full employment Keynesian theory agrees with classical theory, but he says that in most of the time you have unemployment. So when you have unemployed resources, additional money will not act in the way that it is supposed to in classical theory. So after Keynes, there were some developments in this theory. There was Tobins' demand for money. Basically, now one of the problems with Keynesian theory was that, according to Keynes, every individual looks at the interest rate and he decides whether to hold bonds or whether to hold money, and he will either one or the other will maximize his utility. So he will either be holding only bonds or he will be holding only money. Now this doesn't matter when you aggregate over the economy, because different people will have different preferences, and so you'll get a smooth LM curve. But at the micro level, this behavior doesn't seem to match what we see. So Tobin basically invented this theory of portfolio demand, where you have not just money and bonds, but a number of financial assets. They are varying in degrees of liquidity and in risk and in return. So then in such a situation, people will hold a balanced portfolio. This is the basic finding of Tobin, and he shows how you make your portfolio choice. And this ends up with the same LM curve and the same economic theory, that is, interest rates will go down if money is pushed, but it will not go down in exactly the same way that Keynes thought, and actually the effect will be somewhat attenuated. It will not be as strong as in the Keynes case. So on the LM curve, not just Tobin, but there were many other theories of money demand, in fact, that came into existence. And in the IS curve, when Keynes proposed his theory, Pigou countered this by saying that Keynes thought that the depression could remain permanently, but Pigou said that there is a wealth effect. As the money contracts and the prices fall, your real wealth will increase, and this will stimulate aggregate demand. So now again there is another link between the money sector and the real sector, which didn't exist in the classical dichotomy. So Pigou showed that in the long run this wealth effect will drive you back to full equilibrium. So this was not really in conflict with Keynes, because Keynes said that in the long run we are all dead. So he said, I'm doing short-term analysis. But basically this also came into the classical theory with Don Patinkin. He called it the real balance effect. And basically he said that when the prices change, then the wealth or the real balances that you hold, the cash holding that you have, money, now becomes worth more in real terms, and because of this you will have greater aggregate demand. So again this opens up a channel between the monetary side and the real side. Now this is complex. There is a theory involved. Also this has to do with debt and assets, because the value of debt also changes when prices change. All sorts of interest rates also matter, and there are many different mechanisms which have been proposed as to how this channel plays out, and this is actually one of the important areas where mainstream economics is completely wrong currently as to how money affects the real economy, because mainstream economics continues to believe that money is a whale, so money has no effect. So when money has no effect, then figuring out the right channels is not possible. So the right channels through which, how does money act, this is very important, and there are many hypotheses, but nobody really knows. So as far as so these were the developments in Keynesian theory. Now as far as policy goes, the key development was the Phillips curve. It was not part of Keynesian theory, but actually Keynes thought that the money supply at beyond a certain level will cause inflation, and below it will lead to unemployment. So the two were separated neatly. But the Phillips curve said that there are two things. Basically, there is the output gap, which is the amount of unemployed resources. This includes also labor. So basically, when you have full employment, then all the resources are employed and you are at output gap is zero. If you have unemployment, there is an output gap, meaning that the more output could be achieved with the existing resources, but some of the resources are unemployed, and this of course includes labor. So basically, if there is the output gap is zero, it can even go negative. You are employing more. Actually, theoretically, it should never be negative, but practically, you say that okay, at 3% unemployment, you are already at full employment. And so if your unemployment is less than 3%, then you are above full employment, 110% employment. So anyway, if the output gap is zero or negative, then you have inflationary pressures, because now the economy is trying to grow more, but there is no capacity to grow, so the additional growth will only be in the prices. So as the output gap is reduced, the inflationary pressure is also reduced. So basically there is a trade-off between these two things. If you want to lower your output gap, you will have higher inflation, and if you want to control inflation, then you might have to put up with a larger output gap. So this kind of policy based on Keynesian theory was developed over the post-war period, both Keynesian theory and Keynesian policy rejected the main insights of Keynes, as we will see, but they were both compromises. They were halfway ideas. And this was called the neoclassical synthesis, and Samuelson's textbook was a very important part of this neoclassical synthesis, that it made it popularized this new way of understanding economics. And now in the 50s, Friedman started his alternative to Keynes, the monetarist ideas, and basically even the monetarists accepted the basic Keynesian idea that in the short run things work as Keynes said, but they had differences about the long run. So it is said that even Friedman said that we are all Keynesians now, but there is some dispute about this quotation. So basically the monetarists said that the Keynesian policy, that okay, it's true that money can have short-run effects. This was the concession that was being made, but you can't use it to make policy, because they said that if the government says, okay, now we are in recession, let's pursue an expansionary policy, then the economy itself is working to get you out of recession. So by the time that the government monetary policy takes effect, it's possible that the economy will already be in full employment, and now the government policy will hit and will cause inflation instead of causing reduction. So there were long and variable and unpredictable lags in monetary policy, and so it's best to just leave things alone and let the recession fix itself. So basically there was the neoclassical synthesis created a consensus between the classical theory and Keynesian theory by giving up the short run to Keynes but capturing the long run. So they didn't allow for the idea. So there's lots of, in monetarist theory you find papers which show that money is neutral in the long run but not in the short run. So basically that was the neoclassical synthesis that emerged. So the great debate that was occurred in the post-war period, going from 1950s to 70s when I was studying, was monetarism versus Keynesianism, and this was basically about minor issues. There was the interest rate elasticity of investment. Okay, money will have short-run impact on the interest rate, so because of money illusion. So now the question is, how long will money illusion last? So what is the short run? And also the question is, okay, suppose that interest rate is affected, will that cause any serious changes in investment? That was the mechanism by which Keynesian policy was supposed to work. Although none of this is really true, but this was the neoclassical synthesis, and it. There was these were the issues that were the substance of macroeconomic theory, and all of this was called. Basically, Keynesian said that it is easy to fool workers. Money illusion can be created quickly, and it lasts for a long time. So we should use Keynesian policy. And monetarists said that no, money illusion will quickly disappear, and and the monetary policy has long and variable lags, and it has harmful long-run effects, so we should not have this kind of policy. So there was agreement between Keynesians and monetarists that wage rigidity is the cause of unemployment. So the solution was to expand the money supply. What this will cause is it will cause prices to rise. Basically, there was the wage rigidity was in the downward direction. Wages will not fall, but they can go up. So allow prices to rise. This will cause real wages to fall. Basically, temporarily you can get an increase in output because when the prices are rising, the firms think that they have got a bargain because they don't notice that the prices have risen, and so they say that they have money illusion, so they think I'm getting the wage quite cheaply. And also the laborers have money illusion, so they think that they're getting paid a lot more when in fact they're not getting paid a lot. So this will work temporarily, but these policies will lead to inflation. The Keynesians thought that there was an inflation-unemployment trade-off, the Phillips Curve, and the policymakers can choose the outcome. Monetarists thought that the inflation choices would get built into the system and cause harm to the efficiency of the system, and accelerating inflation would result from Keynesian policies. And therefore, basically, Keynesians, monetarists said that you should have a tight fiscal policy, don't inject money into the economy, and also you should have a fixed rule of money growth. This was the Friedman Rule, which we were taught in graduate school, that the best way to do monetary policy is to just fix the rate of increase at 6%. This will allow for real growth of around 3% and also allow 3% inflation. And this will allow, you need to have some inflation, because without inflation the real wage adjustment cannot be done easily. So the way to fix the wage rigidity is to allow there to be inflation. So when there is inflation, then the wages, the real wage level can be adjusted to the right one. So this was the macro debate up until the 70s. But in 70s everything changed. There was stagflation. Basically there was the Yom Kippur war between Israel and Egypt, and US supported the Israelis. So the Arab countries retaliated by imposing an oil embargo. The cost of energy went up dramatically in the US. There was a cost plus inflation, also because the energy enters radically into the production function. There was a shock to the output, and basically output declined, which meant that there was an output gap. So simultaneously you had both inflation and unemployment. And this was not in line with Keynesian theories, which said that you could have one or the other, and there was not much they were not prepared to offer policies for this was an unexpected situation, and they were not prepared. There were some Keynesian policies which were offered, which were wage and price controls were offered, but these are not the right policies to pursue, although these were actually proposed and in fact implemented to some extent, but this was not really what in line with Keynesian thought. So the Keynesian were caught off guard. When I was going to graduate school in the 1974 to 77, Keynesian school of thought was dominant. Monetarist was very much a minority view, and people in Keynesian schools laughed at them, made fun of them, thought that these were crackpots. But things changed after. So now if you read the shock doctrine, you will find that the Chicago school was prepared with their theories, but they said that nobody is going to buy our theories until there is some shock. So that's what the shock doctrine is, that you wait for a shock patiently, and then there was this shock, and as soon as they were shocked, they were there with the plan. So basically Friedman was a very master of psychologists. He said that when people are in shock, then they will believe anything. So there was this shock to the economy, and then he said, okay, here's the diagnosis. The problem is Keynesian theory, and the solution is deregulation and free markets. This was the storyline. Any shock that would have happened, this is what they were ready with the solutions while everybody else was wondering. So their confidence and their preparedness led to the Reagan-Thatcher counter-revolution. So the oil price shock led the economies into recession, and the people were, and basically there was mass public propaganda campaign that there's recession in England, there's recession in UK, and the way to cure this is to impose free market policies. So Reagan in the US and Thatcher in England, they both started implementing free market policies of the classicals, which had been rejected by Keynes. So in the 1980s, Friedman Rule was tried. The Federal Reserve tried to implement the Friedman Rule. He said, okay, we'll try 6%, and he repeatedly failed to hit the target. And the reason we know is that the central bank cannot control the money supply. In fact, I think in 2014, finally, the the Bank of England published a paper in which he said that, what we have been teaching about money is wrong. They didn't say what we have been teaching. They said what the standard theory of the money multiplier, etc., is wrong. This is not how money is created. And they explained the process of money creation by banks. So, this was learned by the policymakers in 1980s, but not by the theorists who continued to teach the same false theory which had been rejected in practice. So at that time, there was a large number of papers that were written on the stability of the demand for money, because the money was not behaving according to the theories of the monetarists. And quietly it was concluded that money demand is not stable, and basically the quantity theory, and this was quietly dropped from the syllabus without any mention that we have rejected this theory. There was also the search, maybe if we define money accurately, then we will get back the quantity theory. So they said M0, M1, M2, M3, M4, M5, and many other definitions were tried. Even in the State Bank of Pakistan, you have a recent paper about 5 years ago which looks for the definition of money which would make the quantity theory come out, and fails to find one, and says that we don't know how to define money. Now actually there is a solution to this problem which was been discovered by Richard Werner. It's called the quantity theory of credit, but since this is not our topic, I will not go into this, but I've asked some students to work on it. Basically now we have a good replacement for QTM, so wherever money is involved, we have an alternative theory. So this allows one to write a large number of PhD theses, because this is a new definition of money which does solve a problem to which economists have been searching for a solution for a long time. So what happened basically is that in the 70s Keynesianism was rejected, and in the 80s monetarism was rejected. So now we were in a complete chaos. So Skidelsky says that rarely in history have such powerful minds devoted themselves to such strange ideas. And Solo said that suppose, and he was talking about Lukas and Sergeant, he names those two people, that suppose somebody sits next to you and says, I am Napoleon. So should I say, well, what tactics did you use at the Battle of Austerlitz? He says, no, I shouldn't do that, because that's playing into his craziness. Instead, now when Lukas and Sergeant start spinning their theories, what they want you to do is to get involved in the technical details, that okay, should we differentiate this equation, or should we put this variable here and that. And this is all that your graduate students are learning, the technical details And what I'm trying to teach you here is the concepts, the ideas behind the theories. And this is also what I would like you to learn, because this is a skill that you're not taught. When you read book, don't read what is in the lines, read why this book was written. What is the idea that this book is telling? And you always have to go beneath the surface. Now, because I am teaching you this, I am not teaching you the other part, which is the mathematics. And one of my students who was being interviewed said that, well, she was asked, they were asked that, well, should you not be taught? And some people said that this is malpractice, you're not being taught the real stuff. But the real stuff is wrong. If it was right, if it was helpful, then it would be worth teaching. But in any case, some familiarity with the real stuff is also necessary, and I have not given you that because I don't have the time, and so you'll have to work on it yourself. So basically, Solo said that you should laugh at them, so that and instead of engaging with them. So this was his strategy. So there was these new classical theories. So classical theory has been rejected. So these new classical theories had very strange ideas, whereas the old classical theories allowed for disequilibrium. These people, Lukas and Sergeant, they said that there is continuous market clearing. There is no disequilibrium anytime. You have moment to moment markets are in equilibrium. So somebody recently said, it was Olivier Blanchard, I think, the chief economist at the IMF for some time. DSGE models are based on assumptions which are profoundly at odds with what we know about consumer information. He said that not just simplifying assumptions, everybody needs to make simplifying assumptions, but these assumptions are so deeply in contradiction with everything we know. So this is one of them. So there's continuous market clearing, there's optimal behavior by all agents at all times, there's complete knowledge of the future except for random shocks, which are random. Rational expectations are there based on forecasts from the right model of the economy. There is no effect of policy because it's perfectly anticipated. People know exactly what the government is going to do. So if they say, okay, government is going to impose, basically the government has run a deficit today of $100, so tomorrow it will impose a tax of $100 to make up for this. So today I must save $100 to make up for that. So then the thing is, this is called the Ricardian equivalence hypothesis. So Stiglitz says that Ricardian equivalence is taught in every graduate school. It's also sheer nonsense. First of all, the idea that we have to pay for deficits is wrong, but there are many other problems as well. So business cycles, why do they happen? Well, actually, according to the Lucasian theory, there are no business cycles. Basically, you have a stable system, and there are random shocks which hit it, and when random shocks hit, the system vibrates to some extent, and that's the theory of the business cycle. And he told one of his students that money has no role to play. It's just about as important as postal economics. I mean, the theory of the post office and how it works is just as. So this is the level of Napoleonness that. That's why Solo, when he was asked to testify by the Congress as to why economics had failed us, he said that, well, the macro theory that we had was designed for Mars, it was not designed for our planet, and that's why it failed. So, now the real business cycle theory went one step beyond Lucas. This time they simply took the monetary variables out of the model. They said so in the classical theory, the wage bargain is done in nominal terms, but the real variables come in, and they equilibrate. But in the real business cycles, only the real variables come in. The nominal variables don't come in. Money is just not part of the picture. Money in banking, there are just no variables like there. So basically, as your text says, that you have a model of a barter economy, a market economy which works by barter. People actually trade things with each other. There is no money in the economy. So that's basically your real business cycle model, is a model of a barter economy. So what caused the Great Depression? According to Keynes, it was a fall in aggregate demand. According to Friedman, it was bad monetary policy which led to a contraction in the money supply. So even Friedman is allowing for a role of money. If you don't have enough money, then you can cause a depression. But Lukas and Sergeant and the real business cycles, they don't even allow this much. So what happened in the real business cycle, the contraction of the money supply cannot cause depression. So in the new classical theories, what happens was that there was a fall in the productivity of labor, and the productivity of labor fluctuates randomly. That's where the random shocks are that come into the economy. So because the productivity declined, the real wage went down. When the real wage went down, the laborers said, oh, we are getting too little money, so at this point we prefer leisure to working. The disutility caused by working is high and the wages we are getting paid is low. So basically they took off work because they didn't want to work. So the Great Depression was really the Great Vacation. People took vacations because they didn't want to work, because they were getting too little. So there's no need for government intervention, because the economy is always working optimally at all points of time from moment to moment. And that's why, so basically the suffering of the unemployed in the Great Depression was the optimal response, because the workers preferred standing in bread lines over working at lower wages. And those who developed these theories actually got Nobel Prizes for their work. So this was on the real side. What happened on the finance side in terms of developments in macro theory? So basically the efficient markets hypothesis said that all forms of financing are equivalent. Basically stocks, bonds, the firms borrow, and they can either use their internal cash reserves, or they can borrow in the market, or they can sell bonds, or they can float stocks. Now, according to the efficient markets hypothesis, all of these forms are exactly the same. So if they have internal funds and they use them, this is the preferred method of investment that the firms have, that you have enough money of your own and then you use it, you don't borrow. But according to efficient markets hypothesis, if you have excess money, then you can lend it at the going market rate. So using your own money, so basically the opportunity cost of using your own money is exactly the same as that of borrowing. So when you float stocks, the market is perfectly wise and they know the value of the stock is exactly equal to the valuation of the firm. So the money that you raise by floating stocks, or if you sell bonds, again, all the things are exactly the same. So this was called the Modigliani-Miller theorem. The financial institutions, the banks mainly, but there are other institutions also, they are intermediaries. There is a stock of cash in the economy. It passes through the financial institutions and then it goes to the investors. So they don't play any role. In particular, there is no credit creation. Credit creation makes the financial institution have an independent role, but this is not present in these theories. So basically, what do the financial institutions do? They gather money by paying interest rate to the depositors, and then they take this money they have gathered and they give it to the investors. There is a gap between the deposit rate at which they give to the depositors and what they take from the investors. So if you have efficient markets, then this gap will be low, and the object of basically how you create efficiency in the finance market is that the difference between the rate being paid to depositors and the rate being taken from should be low. In ideally, if the difference was zero, you would have the most efficient finance, and this is basically the goal of the friction is basically the role of the financial markets is that friction, and that friction, if we can reduce it, that will cause efficiency. So basically, financial markets don't exist; they don't play any real role in the economy. And basically, if you do deregulation, then you increase the ability of the financial sector to create money, and you will reduce this gap, this financing gap, because if the financial markets can create money more easily, the cost of creating capital will go down, and so they will be able to offer the funds more cheaply. So this enhances efficiency, it promotes the creation of credit, and it promotes growth. And that's what the interbank market was created to do, to allow the financial institutions to create credit more easily, more cheaply. In fact, as we have discussed, Minsky thought that was a bad idea. And also he says that there's no need to regulate financial institutions because the market imposes discipline. If the financial institution makes a bad loan, then it will suffer a loss, and it will be either driven out of business, or it will learn from this failure, and it will learn to behave well. So if you have regulation, then basically you are stifling the ability of the financial institutions to make loans. Suppose you say that, okay, don't make any risky loans, then you are preventing the financial institutions from providing financing to a potentially worthwhile project. Let the financial sector take the risk, and that will promote growth. If you prevent that, you will cause a reduction in growth. So this was the mindset, and this was the theory on which Bernanke was running, and that he said that I have learned after the financial crisis that the theories that I had were wrong, and I need to think again. So basically, these are the efficient market theories that say that if you eliminate regulation of financial institutions, you will create dynamism in the economy. Basically, the famous Glass-Steagall Act, which prevented speculation, that allowed the financial market institutions to speculate. If they speculate, they will provide money to enterprises which will allow a dynamic economy to grow faster. If you just prevent all risk taking, then you are making sure that the economy does not grow, because all investment is risky. So basically, regulations are bad, get rid of regulations. So there was a new neoclassical synthesis, which was also called the New Monetary Consensus by Bernanke and his predecessor. It accepts most of the strange ideas that we have been discussing, but it puts in sticky prices and wages. And when you put in sticky prices and wages, then you get some room for Keynesian phenomena. So a Keynesian phenomena, what I call Keynesian phenomena, the main Keynesian phenomena is that unemployment can exist and can persist. So now Keynes himself said that this will happen even if you have flexible wages and prices, because the equilibrium level of wage prices will not converge, will not become low. The real wage is not set in the labor market. But this was never understood And the new neoclassical synthesis that in the short run you have rigidities. So if you have Keynesian phenomena, so the government can intervene and can improve, and basically what this means is that the government intervention can help the market to move faster towards equilibrium. So the new monetary synthesis, what does it say? Well, basically Skidelsky says that once you have swallowed the elephant of rational expectations, then an immediate implication is that there will be continuous full employment. Now everybody sees, except for Lukas, that there is unemployment. So they say, okay, this is a short-term phenomena. It's caused by fixed prices, and so this minor irritation to the synthesis. This is where you can do some monetary policy and basically interest can be adjusted to achieve the optimal trade-off between inflation and output gap. Taylor rule is now allowed, more or less the Phillips curve, but it pays more attention to inflation. So this was the new monetary consensus, and this was the theories that were in use in central banks all over the world, and they are still in use in central banks all over the world. So basically the idea was that since unemployment will eliminate itself in the long run, the only thing you need to do is to control inflation. And so if you do inflation targeting, you make sure, basically this is going back to the Friedman Rule. But the Friedman Rule was that you have to control the money supply and make sure that it grows at a fixed rate. And it was clear that money supply cannot be controlled like this. And then also the quantity theory consensus breakdown, that there is a one-to-one link between money and prices. So now we come to inflation targeting, but inflation targeting cannot be done. Previously, suppose that you want to have 5% inflation or 6% inflation, then only thing you need to do is to make sure that the money grows at 6%. But now money is out of the picture. Nobody knows what money is. So now we use inflation discount rates to control the inflation. But the theory as to how discount rates affect money supply and how money supply affects inflation, these are very much unknown. Nobody knows these mechanisms. So if we have inflation targeting, this will create financial stability, because the financial shocks will go away. People will be able to predict developments in the finance market. Inflation will of course be controlled, that's the direct target, and it will also promote robust growth, output stability. So there is one stone, the discount rate, which will kill three birds. And basically until 2007, mainstream thought economy is that we have solved it all. This is it. We've got the system under control. Lukas said that we have solved the problem of recessions prevention. Greenspan was the maestro, the greatest central banker, and Bernanke said that now we have entered the period of the great moderation. Previously we used to have business cycles, but now we have learned how to control them, and now growth will be moderate. There will be no business cycles anymore and there will be no recessions. Basically the trick that they thought was required was to control expectations. The central bank has to be trusted, and so there was how do you manage expectations, how do you make sure that the market expectations don't fluctuate at random. That was the animal spirits of Keynes, which was rejected long time ago. So stability is promoted by the knowledge that the Fed will intervene to create stability. So basically, a put in the stock market is that if you are holding a stock and you are hoping that it will go up, but you are afraid that it might go down, so you can buy a derivative which is called a put, and this put ensures that if the stock goes below 20% below its current value, or 10%, or however much you want to set, then you can sell the stock at that price. So even if it goes down further, your loss is bounded, it is guaranteed. So you sell this put to somebody, and then if the stock declines, it becomes operational, and your losses are limited. So basically, the Greenspan put was that whenever the stock market declined by 20% or so, then the Fed would intervene to make sure that it doesn't go down further, and they would basically make money available. This were at cheap rates, and when money becomes available, it flows into the stock market, and when people can buy stocks and the demand for stocks increases, then the price decline is arrested. So basically, Greenspan was guaranteeing that he will not allow the stock market to decline. That basically made the finance sector quite strong and stable. It insured people in the finance market against losses and encouraged them to gamble, because their losses are limited. In general, gambling on the stock market is very dangerous because all of your assets can be wiped out. But while you have this Greenspan put, then you can gamble without any. So first, in 1999, the law was repealed which prevented banks from gambling, and then in 2000, Commodity Futures Modernization Glass-Steagall Act was repealed in 1999. In 2000, the Commodity Futures Modernization Act was passed, and basically what it did was it created a large sector which was unregulated. There was no rules applicable. Banking was still regulated, but there were these derivatives and shadow banking and large number of activities that could be done without any supervision. And so this theory and this policy worked until it failed. And in 2007 you had a financial tsunami, and in order to protect the markets, basically trillions of dollars of money was poured in by the central banks. Again, this proves the modern monetary theory that there is really no constraint to spending. If the government can spend $29 trillion and doesn't have to raise taxes to do that, then it's obvious that there is no issue of sustainability of fiscal deficits, and there is no issue of fiscal space in the way that people think there is. So this is not the first time this has happened. This happens quite regularly. As we have learned, stability breeds instability. So when you have stability for a long time, this encourages risk-taking behavior. So when the crisis hit, the central banks accepted their role. Bernanke said that I know what caused the Great Depression. Friedman told us this theory, and he told us that it was the failure of the central banks to put in enough money to prevent the crisis. And so I'm not going to fail this time. So he put in whatever it takes. He put in trillions of dollars, but so the interest rate fell to zero. Money is available for free to anyone who wants to borrow. But this did not have the effect that was desired. The crisis became worse. Unemployment became higher. There was collapse of real estate, and financial institutions went into trouble. So basically the Friedman diagnosis of Great Depression was shown to be wrong by Bernanke, and he said that the theories that we were using to run the world have proven to be wrong. The Great Moderation finished. There were no maestros. They actually their policies led to us to this place. The Great Depression also exploded the orthodoxy. Keynes created a revolution in thought, but this revolution was aborted, or at least co-opted by synthesizers like Paul Samuelson. They took some of the more team aspects of the theory and put that into the synthesis, and the old neoclassical approaches were revived. So the Keynesian revolution was aborted before it could get started. Minsky says that the lessons of Keynes were never introduced. Money is were never understood. Money is not neutral in the short run or in the long run. There is no supply and demand equilibrium in the labor market. Wage bargain is in nominal terms, not in real terms. The real wage is the outcome of complex economy. It is not in control of the firms and the laborers. So firms and laborers negotiate in nominal terms, and the real wage emerges as an outcome. Nobody is in control of it. The future is inherently uncertain. This is very deep insight. This is opposed by rational expectations. Nobody knows what's going to happen, and nobody knows, then rational expectations is just meaningless. And then there is the paradox of thrift. Basically, if you encourage savings, and this is being done everywhere, that how are we going to get money for investment? The savings rate in Pakistan is very low. This is a big problem. We have to increase the savings rate. If we increase savings, we will cut down on aggregate demand. This will cause a fall in GNP. This will cause further decline in savings. So the way to increase savings is to increase aggregate demand. When you increase aggregate demand, then the GNP will go up. When the GNP goes up, even though you're saving less as a proportion, the amount of savings will go up. So this is called the paradox of thrift. All of these things happen because financial institutions create money. As long as you have the financial intermediation model, there's only one amount of money. Either you're going to consume it or you're going to invest it. So then you are stuck with this idea about savings, that if you want to invest, then you have to consume less. But actually what Keynes says is that if you want to invest, you have to consume more, because that will increase the aggregate demand. And when the aggregate demand increases, then the producers will invest more in order to build the capacity to produce more for the demand that they see. So this is quite the opposite of the conventional thinking. Is that understood? Because this is not understood by the majority of the economists or planners. But it's not very complicated to understand. So, in a very, very simplified way, what Keynes said was that at the heart of the production process is the entrepreneur. He is the one who is going to produce. So how much does he produce? He produces according to what he expects to be able to sell. Things don't take place at a single time, and there are no rational expectations. You see, when you have perfect rational expectations, then what you expect to sell and what you actually sell are exactly the same. So then all of the Keynesian phenomena don't come in. So what happens is that when you expect, what you expect to sell is the same as what you will sell, and equilibrium, which happens instantaneously, what you sell will be equal to what is actually produced. But now suppose that we have no linkages. What you expect to sell is just some random assessment of your economy. This is the animal spirits idea. It is not linked to anything that is currently in existence. It doesn't even have to do with your current output. So now what you expect to sell is not linked to anything, so the amount that is going to be produced need not have any relationship to the amount of labor or resources in the economy. It can be less than that, or it can be more than that, or it can be the same. So basically this is the key Keynesian insight, that the level of production will not automatically create full employment. So even if you have perfect competition, and if you have flexible wages, and even if you have fulfilled expectations, this is still true in the sense that you can create an equilibrium where economy, the entrepreneurs expect to sell $1,000 worth of good. They hire half of the labor which is needed, which exists in the economy, because that's enough to produce $1,000. And next period, the amount of money that they pay out is just enough for the laborers to allow them to buy the $1,000. So the half people that were employed remain unemployed. Their expectations are fulfilled. They say we made the correct forecast and we will do it again, even though if their expectations change to $2,000, it would work also, and they would be able to hire all the laborers, and because they hired more laborers, there would be more aggregate demand, and they would be able to sell $2,000 worth of goods. So there is no, even with rational expectations, you don't, and you have a stable equilibrium, there is no sticky wages, no monopoly power, no instability. None of these are needed. These are the theories in the modern period after the 70s, and even in the 70s when the new classical synthesis took place. The real reasons why Keynes said that there would be unemployment were never understood. So they said, oh, it's due to sticky wages, it's due to monopolies, it's due to expectation failure, it's due to instability in the financial markets or in the real sector, but never the real Keynesian explanations. So this is all new classical economics. So Keynes begins with the entrepreneur. A decision to produce is also at the same time a decision to hire. Because the amount you produce is produced by some inputs. It commits the firm to making a stream of payments. Once you say that, okay, I'm going to produce this much, it's not just a one-time thing. You decide that I'm going to produce at this level. So now you are committed to making payments to your laborers, to hire to the factory, to do everything. And there are so many cases. There was a person with a power plant, and he built it. He was hoping to sell power, but it never got started. But the expenses that he had to incur, he had to incur. So when you incur expenses, you might also do some borrowing to finance. Usually you don't, the firms don't have enough money to finance their production decisions, so they borrow and they hope to sell output in order to pay back. So basically firms have an expected stream of payments which is pretty certain. I mean, they can anticipate their costs usually, except for the financing cost. I mean, things can change, but certain relative to what they expect to earn. So there is a stream of payments they are making, there is a stream of earnings that they are getting, but both of these are uncertain. They are in the air. They are based on expectations. Now, if their expectations are that the economy will not improve very much, so the stream of earnings that they earn will not be very strong, will not be able to compensate for the costs that they incur, then they will not hire. And so, depending on their expectations, current unemployment can happen. So, contrary to the neoclassicals who say that if you had flexible wages, then there wouldn't be unemployment. Actually, what happens when the wages go down, and this is something Keynes wrote in his general theory, wages go down, the laborer's income will go down, and the aggregate demand will go down. So actually, it could have the opposite effect. The flexible wages might actually reduce output. So wage flexibility is not the solution. Lower wages negatively affect profits and demand for labor. So the basic Keynesian insights were lost for the last 40 years while people were studying with the neoclassicals and the new classicals and the many other variants of this name. And there was 40 years of debate over fixed and flexible wages, which is completely irrelevant from the Keynesian perspective. Also, Keynes said that Keynes rejected the neutrality of money because production begins and ends with money. So the investor uses money in order to start the production process, and the goal of the production process is to earn more money. This was called MCM prime by Marx. He said that actually the way of it, the natural economy, people have commodities and sometimes they sell them, they earn money in order to purchase other commodities, because that's the standard. The barter economy is based on everybody having commodity. Money is a way to facilitate change. And this is the vision of the real business cycle theory. It's CMC prime. That money is only it comes in temporarily into the picture. I have some commodities, and you have other commodities. We don't have the correct bundle, the one that we desire. So the things that I have excess of, I sell and I get money, and I use this money to buy the things that I need. So that's CMC prime. And that's the barter economy. But he says that the financial economy is not like this. Financial economy is MCM prime. We start with money and our goal is to make more money. And commodities come into the picture as an intermediate. I have money, I hire inputs, I produce goods, I sell the goods in order to make more money. So money is at the heart of the production process. So if there is no money in the system, then in a barter economy it will just cause inefficiency. It will take much longer to do all of the trades that you need to do. But the money economy, it will just collapse, because and that's why also the injections by the government are necessary to run a capitalist economy, because people are working for profits. If there is no extra money that comes into the system, if M prime is not different from M, then nobody can make money no matter what they do, and making money is the goal. So the government must put in more money into the system so that there is more money to be made. Otherwise, nobody can make more money. So recession and unemployment are caused by a decision to not spend, that is to save money. When the firm sees that the sales are going down, then they lay off workers, and this makes problem worse, because aggregate demand further decreases. So basically at the heart of the production process is the investment decision, because it's a forward-looking decision about an unknown future. As worry about future rises, investment falls. And when investment falls, you have lower employment and lower sales, and you have recession. So what Minsky says is that this is the Keynesian theory of boom and bust. It's an investment theory of the cycle. Basically, mainstream classical theories and neoclassical theories and new classical theories, they all have business cycle is dependent on bad policy, monetary policy, or money illusion, or technology shocks. But Keynes does not believe in any of these. It is basically an investment cycle. That the exogenous investments, they can go up and down naturally. They fluctuate according to optimism or pessimism because they are not anchored. And so the Keynesian business cycle is based on the investment decision. And the investment decision is based on expectations, and expectations are about an inherently uncertain future, about which nobody can have correct expectations because there is no mechanism which generates. So one of the insights of Keynes is that the demand for money is created by uncertainty. If the future is uncertain, then the firms, instead of taking their money and investing into production processes, they just invest in financial assets. They are saving their wealth to use in a better time when the expectations increase. So money is a way of carrying your assets from, it's basically liquidity, from one period to another. It's a time machine, as some people have called it. It allows you to, whereas assets are not. So once you buy a factory, then you're locked into a particular asset, a method of production, and if you have made the wrong guesses, you will suffer losses. So instead of doing that, you would basically, so in an uncertain environment, the demand for money increases. But Keynes said that in a neoclassical world, no one would hold money. And exactly Frank Hahn, who is a general equilibrium theorist, he says that there is no way to put money into a general equilibrium model, because when you know the future and you know everything that is going on and you know all the trades, then there is no use for money. And this is basically because the general equilibrium theory framework is a CMC framework. It's based on, and your welfare depends on how much you consume. But now, if the firm is in a MCM work, its welfare is the amount of money it produces. Now money plays an essential role. If you don't have money, then you don't get profits, and without profits, the system won't function. So the Charles Goodhart said that if you want to understand money, then the possibility of default, bankruptcy, somebody borrows but doesn't pay back, these are crucial. That is what makes money valuable. In modern macro models, there are no defaults. There's rational expectation, so there's no need for money in this economy. So with this kind of mental framework, where there's no uncertainty, there's no possibility to understand how money works. Financial instability is also ruled out, because if you have no defaults, then there's no financial instability. Financial instability comes because you bet in a certain way, and what you bet doesn't come true. You think that the house market is going to rise, but it actually collapses. So there was a huge gap between mainstream market and Keynes. Keynes started with animal spirits and degree of confidence, market psychology, and liquidity preference, which includes a speculative demand for money. This is a key part of the Keynesian money function. Now we understand, which I didn't before, that we read about speculative demand, but basically this is the key difference between rational expectations and animal spirits model. The speculative demand comes from not knowing what the future is going to be like. So holding money just in case. So once you start with the Keynesian model, then you can extend it in many different directions. You can have defaults, you can have heterogeneous credit ratings, and basically those who have built upon his work, Minsky is one of them, and there are other people. So basically, when I started this course, my plan was to teach Keynes himself, because my understanding was that Keynes had been dropped. And the Keynesian theory nobody understood, and this is the true. But so I didn't know that there were successors to Keynes, people who had understood Keynes and built on Keynesian theory. So in the process of teaching, I learned. In fact, initially, if you look at the website, it says that we are going to go through Keynes' general theory. So, but while I was preparing for the course, I realized that now people have made progress on Keynes. The modern monetary theory is a development of Keynes, and Minsky is a development of Keynes, and so now we are beyond Keynes. Otherwise, what I thought when I started was that we'll have to go back 100 years and start from where Keynes' revolution was launched, and then the ball was dropped and nobody understood, but especially Samuelson dropped the ball. Samuelson was a big obstacle to understanding Keynes, because Samuelson says that this is Keynes. And instead of saying this is my understanding of Keynes, he said that, Keynes, he wrote that Keynes himself is confused and obscure, and nobody can really understand it. And now I have crystallized, this is the key insight of Keynes, and now this is what Keynes is. So everybody believed him. So nobody went back to actually read Keynes and to check that what Keynes said and what Samuelson said are quite different. So in the concluding remarks, we find that macroeconomics could not see it coming because their models have no possibility of crisis. Their approach denies that the crisis can take place, and it is based on imaginary assumptions, market exchange based on barter. This is the key. The mainstream models don't have any money because they are barter models, and money and finance are added in as an afterthought. The main models of money today, which are in Journal of Monetary Economics and everywhere else, they treat, basically, you see, you have learned this theory, the theory of that money simplifies exchange. So basically, why we have money? Because barter is too complicated. This is a complete misunderstanding of money. This understanding of money makes money as, our goal is still to barter, and money comes in because it simplifies the process of bartering. Now I have to only mention n prices instead of n times n minus 1 over 2 prices. So I have less information that I need with money. But basically it is a barter economy. But what we have is a monetary economy. In a monetary, barter is not the point at all. The point of a monetary economy for people to earn incomes, which is a flexible commodity, which can be used for saving for the future. It can be used for purchases today. And similarly, the firm's objective is to make money. So we live in an MCM world, but the theories are CMC. And then, of course, you have invisible hand, and you have rationality, and you have perfect forecast. So there's no interference, no need for governments. The crisis shows that this approach is irrelevant to the economy that we live in today. So economists who have been working in that tradition did see it coming, and they have offered policy advice which would be helpful. So post World War II, Keynes argued already in 1926 that there is no laissez-faire, there is no invisible hand that magically transforms, everybody acts selfishly and suddenly society is better off. This is a ridiculous thing. That, yes? The general theory explains, so in 1926 he said this, but in 1936 he explained how the free market does not produce full employment. And so basically this had massive effect. Keynes had massive effect on both theory and policy. Even though he was never understood, the little bit that was understood still had dramatic effect on both policy and on theory. Distorted versions of Keynes were used, and they were presented as Keynes. So the central message was that unemployment equilibrium requires government intervention. This was misunderstood as saying that economy can temporarily get stuck in disequilibrium and it needs to be pushed back via pump priming or fine tuning. So pump priming is the idea that the pump, and you put some water into the pump in order to get it to work. So the economy works by itself, but it needs a little bit of help from time to time. This is the idea of fine tuning and of pump priming. And so because Keynes was misunderstood and Keynesian policy was also misunderstood, so the general impression in 70s was that Keynes was tried and Keynes failed. And so that is why, and then monetarism was tried and monetarism failed. So basically everything was put to zero, and then they started macroeconomics from scratch, going back to the classical economic theories. Post-war policy was that you should increase savings and investment if you want the economy to grow. And as we have already said, increasing savings is counterproductive because it reduces aggregate demand. And this policy is based on the loanable funds theory, that first we get savings, this is the money, and then we transfer it to the investors. And this does not take into account the fact that credit is created. And so if increasing investment is partly in the right direction because of the multiplier effect, but it is not by itself enough, that the investment will not automatically take place until you have full employment. So these are the pseudo-Keynesian policies that basically the key is having more money for and investing it. So more money created by deficits and more investment created either by fiscal policy or monetary policy. So this is not actually the true Keynesian theory or true Keynesian policy. Investment does not have enough capacity to complete the to get to full employment. So basically relying on private sector to make investments enough to make sure that you get to full employment, this is not true. This is the pump priming idea, that once you get the process started, it will automatically move to equilibrium, full employment. So the government just needs to give it a push and then get out of the way. There are many reasons to believe that this is not going to work. And the textbook cites some research which shows that this would not work. If we actually succeed in doing that, okay, we do a lot of investment, the government does a lot of investment to create full employment, this will create large amounts of inequality because the capital owners would be making all of the profits. And this is what has happened. So a high investment strategy leads to capital intensive industries, and again this shifts income distribution towards higher paid and unionized workers. What the Minsky contribution, the job guarantee scheme, is that we need to pay attention to the lowest paid employees. Those are the unutilized resources in the economy. the sectoral balance problem basically means that if you want to have profits in the, basically government injections plus foreign injections equals private sector surplus. So either the government has to run deficits, or you have to have export-led growth where the demand is coming in from exports, and without that you cannot get surplus in the private sector. So if the government tries to balance its budget, then there is one way that the economy can work, and that's by borrowing. The consumers borrow to buy, and the firms borrow to invest, and this is the way economy has been working, creating a huge mountain of debt, and the economy cannot, this is not sustainable in the long run. So the mountain of debt is the serious problem. And financial instability creates more problems in the sense that when you have a stable economy and the government is stabilizing, then this creates risk-taking behavior in finance, which leads to expansion of credit and risky investments. So when you have growth, the government budget starts to balance automatically because the taxes increase, and now you need to you are also trying to restrain growth because you are at the top of the cycle. So the Keynesian theory runs into a contradiction in the sense that on one time you are trying to control the expansion, on the other hand you have not achieved full employment. This is what we had in Pakistan policy decision recently, that on the one hand we have huge amounts of unemployment, and on the other hand the inflation is increasing. So we're faced with a dilemma. If we increase interest rates, we will control the inflation, supposedly according to the conventional theory, but you will have a bad effect on unemployment. This actually happened in the Clinton era. There were budget surpluses, and people thought that now we have finally got the economy working in control. But actually, people who are familiar with the Minsky theories said that when the government runs surplus, this will kill the economy, and that is actually what happened. At the same time, the unregulated financial sector created very complex and risky financial instruments and created massive amounts of debt and massive amounts of inequality and massive amounts of fragility in the financial system, as per Minskyan definition of fragility. So what are the policy recommendations of Minsky? We should create jobs and we should raise standards of living for the lowest class of people. Over the 3 decades, infrastructure has declined because the investment has not been made in the right place, in the public sector, because it has been thought that only private sector should be done. And actually, we can create jobs by doing more public sector spending on infrastructure. We need to have targeted spending, not pump priming. We need to pour money into the sectors where there are jobs, create jobs and hire workers, and we can improve infrastructure by hiring workers for this purpose. The global warming creates a large number of possibilities for creating jobs, like planting trees and retrofitting buildings, like we have all of these geysers which are outside our houses, which are burning money to heat the air, and we in the US at least the geysers are planted inside houses where they're not exposed to cold, and we can build appropriate structures. So these are jobs. I mean, the whole nation, a large number of jobs need to be done for green economy. But even with all of these projects, we may not be able to create enough jobs because there's a skills mismatch. This is USA, so there's discrimination in ethnic groups and gender, education, skills, criminal records. There's geographic mismatch. Jobs are in one area, but the people are in another area. So as the economy improves, targeting becomes much more important. You have to create jobs in the area where there are people. You have to create jobs which use the skills which people have. And Minsky says that government should be employer of last resort. Everybody should be able to get a job, but then we have to make sure that the jobs are productive, which means finding jobs which will be able to use unskilled workers. And there are many such jobs. It's just a question of making this the priority. The priority of the economists has never been giving jobs, but the basic, according to, you see, the Minskyan view, which I have also complete agreement with, the problem is not BISP, financial support for the poor. Problem is not growth, getting money to provide for the poor. The problem is to make sure that everybody is engaged in a productive job. And this is not happening by conventional policies. How can we make sure that everyone in Pakistan has a job? That is the number one problem, economic problem. And nobody is thinking about this problem. Except for Imran Khan, but Imran Khan is not the policy maker. The people who is telling to think about, they are thinking about these in terms of conventional frameworks. How can we create jobs? Well, we have to stimulate the private sector, we have to pump money in the economy, and etc., etc. So, standard ways of creating jobs. So, but where will we get the money? There is no fiscal space. The government starts hiring, it will not have money to do that. Well, Kelton has produced a video, but basically, if you think about it logically, we spend money, people get jobs, they produce things. So the economy grows. To the extent that the economy grows by adding production, the additional money will not be additional money buying the same amount of production. So in the first place, this is true. In the second place, we have to look more carefully at intersectoral balances. That is, if I put a lot of money into the building sector and we get huge numbers of buildings, but the food supply remains the same, then we might have inflation in one sector and deflation in other sectors. So this is something that requires some careful thought. So basically, when the global financial crisis hit, the deficit reached $1 trillion, but there was fear of insolvency, which led to rejections in the budget. Globally, austerity was tried, and basically the point is that the responses to the GFC have been based on conventional economic theory, and they have not worked. And in 2015, there is no recovery in sight, because people don't know the right macroeconomic theories. So it's time to try Minsky. Right now, the debate over Minsky is heating up, because I think Sanders has a team which is modern monetary theory. So mainstream economists are coming on and saying, no, MMT is complete foolishness. Don't listen to them. They will ruin the economy, while not having any understanding of MMT. For example, Krugman has an article that, basically MMT is the same as Abba Lerner's functional finance. And so I will criticize MMT on the basis of my criticism of Abba Lerner. So this is ridiculous, although it's true that MMT incorporates functional finance, but it has a lot more depth to it. So today you know more about macro than the economist at the State Bank of Pakistan.